Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is CityTalk. Attempted rapes downgraded to misdemeanors? Attempted robberies recorded as lost property? Cops dragged off to mental institutions? Stop and frisk? CompStat. The Anakin Skywalker becomes Darth Vader approach to New York City policing. And then finally, the NYPD's data. Twain's lies, damn lies, and statistics. Here to talk all things NYPD is Eli Silverman, Professor Emeritus at CUNY's John Jay College of Criminal Justice and the Graduate Center. He is the author of NYPD Battles Crime, Innovative Strategies in Policing, the first in-depth study of the transformation of the NYPD in the 1990s. His crime numbers game, written with John Eterno of Malloy College, won him no friends at One Police Plaza or in the West Wing of City Hall. Neither did his testimony at the federal stop and frisk trial, where his analysis was cited by the court. Welcome back, Eli. Always a pleasure.
My pleasure to be here.
Oh, wait a second. You are still causing trouble. You have been a thorn in the side of the NYPD and Mayor Bloomberg for a while. But let's start at the top. The testimony in the federal stop and frisk trial. In fact, I read the whole thing.
Good
and
for you.
Silverman's got 6 pages, 68 to 74, and cited in the judge's decision. Talk about your testimony and talk about the judge's citation.
Well, I was asked, along with John Eterno, who I've conducted the research with, by the plaintiff's attorneys to report on our research findings.
Right. Floyd et al.
Yes, in the Floyd case.
Right.
And particularly 2 surveys that we conducted. And the one that was so germane to this case was a second survey that we did of approximately 4,000 retired police officers of all ranks. And we had almost 2,000 returnees, which is an almost 50%
Response rate.
Yes, which is
Pretty
quite
good.
quite
As a
remarkable.
survey researcher, yes.
Quite remarkable. And what we did in this survey is talk to the retirees and ask them about the pressures that they felt during 3 different periods. Prior to 1995 to 2001, and 2002 to the present.
Basically, the last being the Bloomberg-Kelly reign.
Exactly.
Okay.
Because we wanted to assess, we've heard many anecdotal reports. Police talk to us all the time and talk about the increased pressure that we get.
And you had done a prior survey. You talked about it here, right here on this set.
We did a prior survey, but
Go ahead.
The prior survey had 2 periods. This we made more discreet.
Okay. Go ahead.
And this survey, we tried to accommodate any criticism that was made of our previous survey.
And you were hammered, but we won't talk about that.
We were hammered. They said, well, they could report any pressure. But we asked them in this survey what they personally experienced and knew.
Smart.
Yes.
Smart, rather than heard.
Right, exactly.
Or knew of.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
And many of them talked about at least 3 or 4 incidents that they are aware of, about 80%.
And the bottom line of the study
is that in the Bloomberg-Kelly era, the pressure on summonses, arrests, and stop and frisk increased significantly. In stop and frisk, which was what we reported in this trial, in the pre-CompStat era, it was about a 9% for high pressure.
Right.
It was almost quadrupled to almost 36% in the Kelly-Bloomberg era. And so
you broke up CompStat into sort of the Giuliani period and the Kelly Bloomberg period. Okay.
That's correct. And the pressure to increase stop and frisk, summons, and arrests all went in one direction, up. But there was one question that we put in there: how much pressure was there to obey constitutional legal rights? That was the only one which went in the opposite direction. Low pressure.
Yeah, but the wording is a little loaded, but I get it. That's probably true.
Actually,
Is there anything in the academy curriculum that talks about that?
I must say that wording was, we pre-tested that survey, and I need to report that that wording was suggested by a former high-ranking official in the police department. He said, you guys ought to look at this. And so the judge said, well, report on that as well.
Okay.
That would be interesting.
Good.
And it was significant that everyone went one direction and this went on the other direction. And the same question applied to all three periods. So is there anything, this was the main issue as far as I'm concerned that emerged from this trial. And that is, before the Floyd case, there was a previous case, Daniels.
Right.
Daniels was the police, it was a consent agreement.
Right.
They agreed to make certain changes, remedies in the way they did things, including training, including education, including supervision. And one of the major things that emerged from that trial, if one reads the judge's decision, is that that these issues of constitutional legal rights, reasonable suspension, were not even on the back burner. They were not on any burner. So they never emerged in CompStat meetings or any training. So it wasn't that the police said, I'm going to deny your rights. It was that this wasn't attended to.
So it was a lack of attention.
It's a lack of attention.
It's more omission than commission?
It's omission, but the omission has consequences.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Clearly it does. Okay. So you testify, and you presented, I presume, in writing. Did you do it orally?
I did two things.
Set the scene.
Well,
Who plays you in the movie? No, go ahead.
Someone who was very nervous.
Right. Okay.
Because first you have the pretrial where you're examined by the city's attorney, and they try to get you discarded and not allow you to enter, and then you go through that, a lengthy pretrial examination,
Right.
And then you go to the actual trial. I was allowed in the trial.
Right.
We submitted.
And when you say you and John Eterno?
No, John did not testify because he was involved in some of these issues while in the police department.
Okay, so there might be a conflict.
Yes, he elected not to, which was fine. So the burden was on me in this case.
Oh, man. So
I went to trial. We submitted in advance some of the results from these studies and put it in very neat format with statistical measures to show the significance of these. And we presented it. I then was first, of course, the plaintiff's attorney examined me, and then the city's attorney.
Right.
And their main thrust was to...
Whose main thrust?
The city's main thrust was to besmirch and to denigrate these studies. They weren't relevant, they weren't representative. In fact, the day I went back, the second day I went back, I was handed a piece of paper just like that, which I had never seen the second day, and which pretended to display the fact that our results were not representative of the retired population.
Okay.
So at the first I saw it, the two lawyers are going back and forth on this, which shouldn't be admitted.
Did you expect as an academic
No,
that you would be in
no,
the middle of a TV show
when I started
or
this,
a movie?
When I started this, John and I never expected this
Okay,
to
now wait,
emerge.
let's just stop.
And wait a
Go
second.
ahead.
And then they go back and forth, and I said to the judge, I said, may I object, Your Honor? And she looks at me and she says, well, it depends on what you have to say. And I said, well, I think this chart is bogus. And I told her why, and she said, it's dismissed.
So you're feeling pretty good.
I was feeling...
You're nervous as all get out.
Yes, I felt very good because I felt I was being ambushed.
Okay, now let's get to it. Let's go to the actual wording of the decision, and I'll just read it real fast on page 70, the last graph. although the city attempted to undercut the reliability of the 2008 and 2012 findings, I find that the city's criticisms do not undermine the survey's central finding for the purposes of this case. NYPD personnel experienced or aware of pressure to increase the number of stops after the introduction of CompStat, and especially after the arrival of Mayor Bloomberg and Commissioner Kelly. And then you read the rest of this. Your study is part of the bedrock case upon which she decides against the city and then recommends a federal monitor.
Yes.
Okay. So that's Eli Silverman causing trouble number one. Eli Silverman causing trouble number two is that you and John have taken to writing op-ed pieces in the Guardian newspaper in England.
Well, actually, we didn't solicit this. They actually asked us.
I know, but go ahead. So let me just go to this. So there's two pieces. You didn't write the headlines, but they capture the story. Mike Bloomberg's fact-free defense of stop and frisk. That's the lead headline. Yeah. And the second is the mayor and NYPD Chief Ray Kelly claimed that without the discredited tactic, New York would be overrun by crime. Baloney. Respond. Tell me, is it baloney?
Of course it's baloney. It's a scare tactic. It's you know what? They've run this narrative for years. The narrative goes as follows.
Go ahead.
That what a narrative does is appeal to people's fear and sense of security.
This particular one.
Yes. This.
Go ahead.
Yes. This is a symbolic narrative, and
okay,
that's
go
what
ahead.
it does. And they've said for years when we first came out, you're against cops, anti-cop mugging, and therefore crime is going to return to the streets. And they do the same thing with the stop and frisk. No one argues, we certainly don't argue that stop and frisk should be abandoned, but stop and frisk should be what it was intended to be. And that is a tool to see if crime is about to be committed, has been committed, or is presently committed. It's not a tool that you meet a quota. It's been turned on its head. And so what we're saying is you're appealing to people's fears when you say you introduce this monitor, you introduce these reforms of stop and frisk, and you're going to have crime on the streets, and you're going to have 1990 all over again. That's a narrative that they're selling, and it's a handy narrative, but it's one that they've consistently used.
What's the counter narrative? The
counter narrative is look at the facts. The facts show that when stop and frisk were under 100,000, you had over a 70-some-odd% decline in crime. And then when you increase the number of stop and frisk from under 100,000 in 2002 to 2011, when it went to almost 680,000, right, it made an insignificant difference. And in the last year, the number of stops have gone down because of all the pressure. Cops are worried now, naturally, and crime has continued to go down, and murders have gone down. So the narrative is that this may be intuitive, but it's counterintuitive if you really look at the facts. The facts don't bear out this. But you know why? They've been stuck to this narrative, and they feel, well, it's like taking a medicine. If you take 5 grams of a medicine, it works. Well, why not triple and take 50 milligrams and forget about the side effects? The side effects of this stop and frisk policy have been very severe to minority communities and trust in the police.
Okay. How do you derive the benefits of stop and frisk? Because I think it's undeniable that in some way it does take guns off the street, and it does in some sense prevent crime or deter it or stop it in progress. Now, how do you have your cake and eat it too? We're going to have a new mayor and a new police commissioner. They call you up. Eli, you're a noted guy. Tell me, what should I do about stop and frisk?
Restore it to its original purpose. And train people what reasonable suspicion is, what constitutes reasonable suspicion, and most importantly, take away the central headquarters pressure that emanates from the top through the mechanism that we call CompStat, these CompStat
We're gonna talk
crime
about that, right.
strategy meetings, which put enormous pressure on the cops. You know, the cops don't like doing this. I have letters and stuff. I just got a recent email from a retired, and they talk about this. This is not what the purpose. We did our survey, and many people wrote in comments in the survey. They said, this is not what it was intended.
Right.
This is not, it's like saying all marriages are the same, polygamy and monogamy. They're both marriages, but they're different. To say this stop and frisk is like the original stop and frisk is just in the name. And so you need to change it, and you need to change it. And the other thing you need to do is restore the CompStat process to its original purpose, which is have people responsible for crime in their areas, the precinct commanders,
Right.
but give them the tools to do it, and don't subject themselves to a quota of 3 of this, 4 collars, 3 Parkers, etc.
Okay, now, what you argue, and John argue, and other critics argue, is that in a sense, as I said in the intro, that CompStat went from Anakin Skywalker to Darth Vader, that, you know, you had the potential hero, and in fact, you had a hero, and then it turned dark. Now, first of all, what is CompStat? Let's do a quickie, because we're assuming that everybody knows pretty much what it is, and why CompStat numbers drive policy.
CompStat arose for a very good reason. We want to measure performance. Performance measurement is a good thing when it's done right.
Right, and you wrote about it in your first book, NYPD Battles Crime.
But when I updated
you turned.
Well, actually, I didn't turn. CompStat turned.
Okay, go ahead.
And when I did an update in 2001 in an epilogue, I don't think your copy has the epilogue. It would be on the front.
It's signed, too. Go ahead. No, go.
The epilogue, I updated, and I talked about what some disturbing trends I had heard about. And John Eterno, my co-author, had also heard about.
And he was a captain.
He was a retired captain, and a very well-regarded captain. He got his PhD through the police department, who sponsored. He won awards. So when we collaborated, we said, let's see what we can find out. And what we found out, that these crime strategy meetings, which make sense to look at performance of people, you should measure.
I've actually sat in on one. Go ahead.
Yes, I've sat in hundreds of them.
Well, my one was eye-opening.
Yes, it is eye-opening. And that makes sense to have people accountable, have up-to-date information, have the different silos, the different units within the department. It's a large department.
Jack Maple and then Bratton were brilliant.
Yes, and they got
simple stuff, simple management.
Exactly, it's basic management.
But they never did it.
But you know, you go to most organizations, including universities, you see how dysfunctional they are.
Thank you. Oh yeah, that's good. Just say we're dysfunctional. Go ahead.
Well, you know how each
You're
one
emeritus. I'm still working.
They all have their own silos, and let's put it that way. And there's generally a lack of cooperation. And so this was to get everyone on the same page. You have all the relevant actors in the same room.
They talk to one another with real-time data. Excuse me, what's not the law?
And have you responsible for that, and that made sense.
Right.
And you, for the first time, they got up-to-date data, and not 6 months to a year old that they provided to the FBI. What good is it that old? The bad guys have left the area.
But the bottom line is it contributed to the already declining rates of crime, clearly. I mean, it's almost inescapable.
Absolutely.
Okay, go ahead, keep going.
Absolutely it contributed, and it made sense. But what happened is then they began this narrative of, you know what, we can drive down crime, the police and the politicians, regardless of anything. And against any law of criminology, they said it will go just in one direction, down. Doesn't worry how many cops.
Right, the slope is a hell of a lot different.
Yeah.
Come on, go ahead.
Yeah, but regardless of the number of cops, regardless of conditions, regardless of external factors, regardless of no worries. You elect me with my...
Okay, this is a political imperative.
And it's
then.
a political imperative. And against the old, they took the conventional wisdom and turned it on its head, and now crime will go down. Many a high-level police official told me at the time, you know what? we should declare victory and say, you know, there are going to be some fluctuations. We'll drive.
Yeah.
But no, they refused to do it. So anything that suggested that it may not be the case, and by the way, in our survey, we asked, the last survey, we didn't report on this, but in our last survey, we asked people what if they thought actually crime went down. The 2000.
And you're saying maybe no because the
No,
numbers look up?
they said crime went down,
Oh.
but not to the extent, that the police department.
Okay, now wait. Let me just interject. But that three-person commission that we talked about
Yeah.
way back when,
Yeah.
that was formed in early 2010,
Yes,
11?
yeah.
Released a report in July, and two of the three are alive.
Right.
One had died. Man, you know, as much as they try to sugarcoat it, that was a real critique of the NYPD in terms of lack of supervision, cases of abuse, sort of gave credence to what you were arguing.
It's quite amazing. Here was a committee picked by the commissioner, not they were good people, bright people, but it wasn't
All
an independent.
former
But
prosecutors.
it wasn't an independent commission. It didn't have subpoena
Right.
power. We actually met with them at one time, and it was clear to me that they were good intention and bright people, but they didn't have subpoena power. They acknowledged it. They didn't have the power to grant immunity
Right.
to cops. So how can they come up with it? And
But still-
But despite that, exactly your point. Despite that, they still said, "Wow, there's a number of things here that need attention." Now we know why they sat on it for a few years when they said it would be.
You think it's intentional?
I don't know why they sat on
Okay.
it. I don't
I
know.
was just trying to be fair a little bit.
I don't know why they sat
Okay.
on it, but and incidentally, the judge cited that in her test and
Yes.
said it confirmed what
Yes.
we had been
yes.
writing.
Yes. I mean, you came out really good in this. I mean, it's really fascinating reading all 167 pages.
You're one of the 7 that
Oh,
probably
please.
did it.
Okay, wait a second. Then your second article in The Guardian, I have to do this, now I have to rush. Ray Kelly's record should rule him out of heading Homeland Security. Oh, man. You can't be popular at one police plaza.
I'm sure
mean-
not. Yeah, it's interesting. I'll tell you a story. When I was testifying, there were a couple high-level people from the police department there who I'd been on formerly very good terms with.
Right, forget it.
And then we both were in the coffee area, and we said hello to one another and all that, but it was awkward. But you know what? We're not doing this out of malice. What strikes us is this is a very sad legacy of this administration, because this is a fine police department, and they brought up this monitor on themselves because they refused to.
The federal monitor that the judge
Yes, right.
mandated for the
No
city.
police department wants a federal monitor.
No.
And plus, it's going to cost the taxpayers a lot of money.
Okay, what does this federal monitor do? Likely to do? Because it's really not specified.
Hey, there's a second opinion, which is the remedy,
Right.
but it gives a great deal of discretion to the monitor,
Right.
who has to report to the judge, and it's open-ended. We know the monitor has to look at training. It's suggested pilot of cameras.
In terms of stops and
yeah,
frisks.
and the select
And one of the
precinct-
LA does it? Somebody does it.
Yeah, small communities do
Okay.
it. No big department does it.
Okay.
But, the interesting thing, cops are against it. But you know what? Every police department I've worked with, when they've been forced to have cameras, the cops have liked it. And
Because ultimately they're protected.
they're protected and
Right.
more, and a lot of false allegations
Right.
against
And
them.
there's lots of good cops.
Right.
And there's a lot of
Right, lots of good
allegations.
cops,
Okay.
and they feel justified.
Okay.
This is a fine police department, and they could have avoided this whole thing because they've been intransigent. They have not had any transparency. They've not permitted any outsiders to review it. All this stuff has been internal, and so, or leaked to certain people. So there's been no outside oversight. And the absence of that, this is what the result is. They refuse to talk with the critics. They refuse to meet with the critics. So this is what eventually happened.
Okay, so I sort of posed this question before. I'm going to pose it. Bill de Blasio wins the election in November, calls you up literally and says, policy advice. What should I do? And I want specifics.
Yeah.
Joe Loda, he wins. He's the mayor. He makes the same call. What do you tell both of them?
Well, you need to pick a commissioner who's going to be transparent, who's going to be open, who can work with a monitor, because you've
got a monitor.
You have a monitor,
And you have an inspector general.
You have an inspector. You have to have someone who's skilled at that. You have to have someone who's skilled at commanding the respect of the police. Right now, there's a great deal divide in the police department. And
You're talking about rank and file.
Yeah, rank and file, yes.
Talk to me. You got 30 seconds.
Because they feel the pressure on them. They don't like going in these communities and doing
Busting people.
They're busting
Silly
because
thing.
they're dependent. You know, police are only as effective as the community
Sure.
within.
Sure.
And so you need a commissioner, he or she, who's going to command respect and yet work well internally and well externally.
So they got to be good cops, good cops.
They have to be good cops, but open cops and not secretive cops.
Okay.
We're done already?
Yes, we are.
Wins.
My thanks to Eli Silverman for being on the show. See you next week here on CUNY TV. Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. Let us know what you think about this show. You can reach us at CUNY.TV. When you get there, click on the bar that says Contact Us and send your email. Whatever it is. Thanks, no thanks, obnoxious, do it. Send it.